What if I told you that a simple foam pit at a gaming convention would end careers, break spines, and expose one of the biggest corporate cover-ups in streaming history? The TwitchCon 2022 incident wasn't just an accident, it was a preventable disaster that Twitch desperately wants you to forget. October 2022, San Diego. TwitchCon was supposed to be the ultimate celebration for streamers and their communities. Thousands of fans packed the convention center, excited to meet their favorite creators and experience the latest in gaming technology. Among the attractions was what appeared to be an innocent foam pit battle arena, sponsored by Lenovo. The setup looked harmless enough. Streamers would compete in gladiator-style battles, wielding foam weapons before inevitably tumbling into what everyone assumed was a safe, cushioned landing zone filled with foam blocks. The promotional material made it look like pure fun, streamers laughing, jumping, and battling it out before diving into the pit with big smiles. What could possibly go wrong? The foam blocks were there for a reason. They were supposed to provide a soft landing, protecting participants from injury. Convention goers watched as their favorite creators lined up for their turn, treating it like any other booth activity. But here's what nobody realized and what Twitch and Lenovo failed to disclose: this wasn't actually a safe foam pit. Beneath those colorful foam blocks was a horrifying reality that would soon destroy lives. The pit was only 1 foot deep. 1 foot. Underneath that thin layer of foam was solid, unforgiving concrete. The same concrete that makes up convention center floors. No padding, no cushioning system, no safety measures whatsoever. When streamers jumped in, they weren't landing on protective foam. They were essentially jumping onto a concrete floor with a few blocks scattered on top. The foam was purely decorative, creating a deadly illusion of safety. This wasn't just poor planning, this was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. And explode it did. The first signs of trouble came quickly. Participants started complaining of pain after their turns. Some limped away, laughing nervously and trying to play off obvious discomfort. Others were visibly shaken, though the full extent of the injuries wouldn't become clear until later. The atmosphere around the pit began to shift from excitement to concern, but the activities continued. Then came the moment that would change everything. Popular streamer Adriana Chechik stepped up for her turn at the foam pit battle. Known for her high-energy content and fearless personality, she approached the challenge with the same enthusiasm that had made her a streaming sensation. The crowd watched as she engaged in the foam weapon battle, laughing and playing up to the cameras. What happened next would haunt everyone who witnessed it. When Chechik jumped into the pit, the sickening sound of impact echoed through the booth. This wasn't the soft thud of someone landing safely in foam. This was the devastating crack of a human body hitting concrete. The laughter stopped immediately. Chechik didn't get up. She couldn't get up. In that horrifying moment, the truth was revealed. The foam pit was a death trap, and Adriana Chechik had just become its most visible victim. But what happened to her was only the beginning of a story that would expose corporate negligence, medical nightmares, and a cover-up that continues to this day. The real question isn't what went wrong, it's how many people knew this would happen and let it continue anyway. The medical emergency that followed Adriana Chechik's fall revealed just how catastrophic this incident truly was. Paramedics rushed to the scene as Chechik lay motionless in the pit, unable to move her lower body. The initial diagnosis was devastating. She had broken her back in 2 places, 2 separate fractures to her spine from a single fall into what was supposed to be a harmless foam pit. But the full extent of her injuries was even worse than anyone initially realized. Hospital scans revealed that Chechik hadn't just suffered simple fractures, she had sustained severe spinal trauma that would require immediate, life-altering surgery. Doctors discovered extensive damage that threatened not just her ability to walk, but her basic quality of life. The impact had been so severe that emergency spinal fusion surgery was the only option to prevent permanent paralysis. The surgical procedure itself was a nightmare. Surgeons had to insert metal rods into her spine to stabilize the fractures and prevent further damage. This wasn't a simple fix. It was a complete reconstruction of her back, using hardware that would remain in her body permanently. The surgery took hours, and the recovery would take years if full recovery was even possible. What makes this tragedy even more heartbreaking is what Chechik was forced to sacrifice for her survival. In a revelation that shocked her followers, she disclosed that she had to terminate a pregnancy to undergo the emergency surgery. The medications and procedures required to save her spine were incompatible with pregnancy, forcing her to make an impossible choice between her own survival and her unborn child. This devastating personal loss added another layer of trauma to an already life-shattering experience. The recovery process has been a living hell. Even after multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation, Chechik continues to suffer from chronic pain and persistent irritation in her lower spine. The metal rods, while necessary to prevent paralysis, create constant discomfort. Simple activities that most people take for granted, sitting, standing, walking, became daily challenges requiring careful planning and pain management. But Chechik wasn't the only victim that day. Famous, another streamer who participated in the foam pit battle, also sustained serious injuries. She dislocated both knees in her fall, requiring medical treatment and extensive physical therapy. Unlike Chechik's highly publicized injuries, Famous's suffering received little media attention, demonstrating how this disaster affected multiple people in ways the public never fully understood. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't a freak accident involving one unlucky participant. Multiple people were getting hurt because the setup was fundamentally dangerous. Convention staff and medical personnel were dealing with injury after injury from the same source, yet somehow the activity continued. What's particularly disturbing is how these injuries were initially downplayed. Convention organizers and booth staff seemed more concerned with maintaining the festive atmosphere than addressing the obvious safety crisis unfolding before their eyes. Injured participants were quietly whisked away for medical attention, while new victims lined up for their turn at the death trap. The psychological trauma accompanying these physical injuries cannot be overstated. These streamers came to TwitchCon for what should have been a career highlight, meeting fans, creating content, celebrating their success in the streaming world. Instead, they left with life-altering injuries, facing uncertain futures and medical bills that would drain their savings. For Chechik specifically, the incident didn't just end her attendance at TwitchCon, it fundamentally changed her entire life trajectory. A content creator whose career depended on physical capability and energy suddenly found herself facing an uncertain future with chronic pain and mobility limitations. The vibrant, energetic personality her fans loved was now struggling with basic physical functions. Even more shocking is what happened after these devastating injuries became apparent. While victims lay in hospital beds fighting for their recovery, the corporate machinery that created this disaster was already working to distance itself from responsibility. But that's just the beginning of how deep this cover-up truly goes. Here's where this story gets truly disgusting. While Adriana Chechik was undergoing emergency spinal surgery and fighting for her ability to walk, Twitch, the billion-dollar company that organized this event, went completely silent. Not a phone call, not an email, not even a basic welfare check. Chechik herself revealed that Twitch had not reached out to her at all, following the incident that destroyed her back at their own convention. Think about that for a moment. A major content creator gets permanently injured at your flagship event, requires emergency surgery, and faces a lifetime of chronic pain, and you don't even bother to see if she's okay. This wasn't just corporate indifference, this was calculated avoidance of responsibility. Twitch knew that any communication could be seen as an admission of liability, so they chose complete silence over basic human decency. But Twitch's strategy went beyond just ignoring the victims. When pressed for comment about the incident, they immediately started pointing fingers at their corporate partner. The foam pit wasn't technically run by Twitch. It was a Lenovo-sponsored booth, so naturally, Twitch began distancing themselves from any responsibility, claiming they weren't directly involved in the setup or safety protocols of the pit. This blame-shifting strategy was as predictable as it was pathetic. Twitch wanted everyone to believe they were just innocent landlords who had no control over what happened at their own convention. Never mind that TwitchCon was their event, their brand, their responsibility. Never mind that they approved the booth, promoted the activities, and encouraged streamers to participate. When people got hurt, suddenly it was everyone else's fault. Legal experts who analyzed the situation weren't buying Twitch's excuses for a second. Multiple attorneys specializing in premises liability and negligence cases stated publicly that Twitch could absolutely face major lawsuits over this incident. The idea that signing a waiver would protect them from such obvious negligence was laughable to anyone who understood the law. The waiver defense is something companies love to hide behind, but courts regularly throw out liability waivers when gross negligence is involved. And this was textbook gross negligence, setting up a dangerous attraction that appeared safe but was actually a concrete floor with decorative foam. No reasonable person would expect a foam pit to be only 1 foot deep over solid concrete. The deception itself was negligent. What makes Twitch's response even more infuriating is how this foam pit disaster wasn't the only safety failure at TwitchCon 2022. The entire event was plagued with security problems, accessibility issues, and organizational failures that put attendees at risk. Reports emerged of inadequate security leading to violence and stalking incidents. Disabled attendees complained about the complete lack of accessibility accommodations, forcing people with mobility issues to navigate dangerous conditions. The foam pit was just the most visible symptom of a much larger problem. Twitch had prioritized spectacle over safety, profits over people. They wanted to create viral moments and sponsor-friendly content without investing in proper safety infrastructure or risk assessment. The result was a convention that functioned more like a lawsuit waiting to happen than a professional industry event. Industry insiders began speaking out about the broader culture of negligence at Twitch events. Former employees and contractors revealed that safety concerns were regularly dismissed in favor of flashier presentations and cost-cutting measures. The foam pit incident wasn't an aberration, it was the inevitable result of a company that consistently chose shortcuts over safety. Even more disturbing were the reports about how Twitch handled the immediate aftermath at the convention itself. While Chachik was being rushed to the hospital, convention organizers were allegedly more concerned with managing the optics than addressing the safety crisis. The foam pit was quietly shut down, but not before several more people had already been injured. Witnesses described a scene of controlled chaos as Twitch staff scrambled to contain the damage to their brand image. Instead of immediately announcing a safety review or expressing concern for the victims, their focus seemed entirely on preventing negative publicity. It was damage control in the most literal and heartless sense. The media response was initially significant, with major gaming and streaming outlets covering the incident extensively, but as legal teams got involved and corporate pressure mounted, the story began to fade from headlines remarkably quickly. Suddenly, the gaming press that had been so eager to cover the drama lost interest in following up on the victims' recovery or the legal ramifications. This coordinated silence wasn't accidental. Twitch has significant influence in the gaming media space through advertising dollars and exclusive access arrangements. When they want a story to disappear, they have the tools to make it happen. The foam pit incident became a perfect case study in how corporate power can bury inconvenient truths. But despite their best efforts to control the narrative, Twitch couldn't stop what was coming next. The victims weren't going to stay silent, and the legal system doesn't care about corporate PR strategies. The real reckoning was just beginning. Here's what Twitch desperately hoped would never happen. The lawsuits came anyway. Despite all their legal waivers, corporate deflection, and media manipulation, multiple attendees filed negligence lawsuits against TwitchCon over the foam pit injuries. The legal reality that Twitch tried so hard to avoid became unavoidable, and their worst nightmare began playing out in courtrooms. The lawsuits weren't just from Adriana Chechek, though her case obviously carried the most weight due to the severity of her injuries. Multiple victims came forward with their own legal claims, creating a pattern of negligence that would be impossible for Twitch to dismiss as isolated incidents. When several people get hurt from the same obviously dangerous setup, it becomes very difficult to argue that it was just bad luck. What makes these lawsuits particularly damaging for Twitch is how they expose the company's complete failure to implement basic safety protocols. Legal documents revealed that there was no proper safety assessment of the foam pit, no medical personnel stationed nearby, and no clear emergency response plan when injuries inevitably occurred. This wasn't just an accident, it was predictable negligence. The legal experts who initially predicted these lawsuits were proven absolutely right. Courts don't typically honor liability waivers when gross negligence is involved, and a foam pit that's only 1 foot deep over concrete definitely qualifies as gross negligence. No reasonable person signing a waiver would expect such a deceptively dangerous setup. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The specific outcomes of these lawsuits have been kept remarkably quiet. While we know the suits were filed, there's been almost no public information about settlements, verdicts, or case resolution. This silence is extremely suspicious and suggests that Twitch may have paid significant settlements with strict non-disclosure agreements attached. Corporate settlements with NDAs are a common strategy for burying embarrassing legal problems. Twitch likely calculated that paying victims substantial sums of money to stay quiet was cheaper than the ongoing reputational damage of prolonged court battles. If that's what happened, it means the true cost of this disaster, both financial and legal, has been completely hidden from the public. Meanwhile, the human cost continues to mount. Adriana Chechik's recovery remains an ongoing struggle more than 2 years later. She still deals with chronic pain, limited mobility, and the psychological trauma of having her life permanently altered by corporate negligence. The metal rods in her spine serve as a daily reminder of how a moment of corporate cost-cutting destroyed her quality of life. The 6 herniated discs she sustained continue to cause persistent irritation and pain despite multiple surgeries and extensive physical therapy. This isn't a story with a happy ending where everything goes back to normal. This is a lifetime of managing pain and limitations that could have been completely prevented with proper safety measures. Other victims face their own ongoing challenges, though their stories have received far less attention. The streamer who dislocated both knees continues to deal with mobility issues and the long-term effects of her injuries. These people trusted Twitch to provide a safe environment and were betrayed in the most devastating way possible. What's perhaps most infuriating about this entire situation is how Twitch has attempted to move forward as if nothing happened. TwitchCon returned in 2024 and is scheduled again for 2025 in San Diego, the same city where these devastating injuries occurred. There's been no public acknowledgement of the safety failures, no meaningful reforms announced, and no accountability for the decisions that led to permanent disabilities. The 2025 TwitchCon announcement came with no mention of enhanced safety protocols, no reference to the foam pit disaster, and no assurance that similar negligence wouldn't occur again. Twitch is betting that enough time has passed and enough NDAs have been signed that they can simply pretend this never happened. This strategy of corporate amnesia is particularly disgusting when you consider that real people are still suffering the consequences of Twitch's negligence every single day. While Twitch executives move on to planning their next profitable event, Adriana Chechik wakes up every morning in pain from the metal rods in her spine. The broader streaming community has largely moved on as well, which is exactly what Twitch was counting on. The fast-paced nature of internet culture means that even devastating stories like this one eventually fade from collective memory. New dramas emerge, new controversies capture attention, and corporate disasters get buried under the constant stream of content. But the legal and financial consequences haven't disappeared just because the story left the headlines. Insurance companies' legal settlements and ongoing medical costs represent millions of dollars in damages that Twitch is likely still paying. The true cost of their negligence extends far beyond what the public will ever know. The foam pit incident stands as a perfect example of how massive corporations can cause devastating harm to individuals and then use their resources to bury the consequences. Money, legal pressure, and media influence combine to turn a story of corporate negligence into a forgotten footnote in streaming history. Yet the victims remember, their families remember, and somewhere in sealed legal documents and confidential settlement agreements, the full truth about Twitch's responsibility for this disaster is preserved. The corporate machinery succeeded in hiding the story from public view, but it couldn't erase the permanent damage done to real human lives. As TwitchCon 2025 approaches, attendees will once again trust Twitch to provide a safe environment for their community celebration. Whether that trust is justified remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the company that allowed a foam pit to permanently disable multiple people is the same company organizing the next event. The question isn't whether they've learned from their mistakes, it's whether they ever acknowledged making any mistakes at all.